안녕하세요. 이부슈 파렌티비오 신구세 신치미롱 안녕합니다. This was Korean. At least I hope it was the right Korean and the right pronunciation. The reason I did that is because the second most viewers from my channel come from Korea. And I just want them to be part of the community, so I learned that couple of words. So this week is a very special video, in that we are for the first time looking at new features of a just dropped newly Octane 2023.1 inside of Cinema 4D. So let's grab your coffee, buckle up, and let's keep going. Welcome to 3D land. So before we start, there are two things. First, I think that's going to be a rather long video because we have a lot of ground to cover. The second point is that I'm going to use very simple scenes to just show off the feature, give my honest opinion about that. If you want to have that in a more vibrant, more complex scene, then you have to try it on your own on your scenes. So let's get started and show the first feature, which is analytic lights. Alright, so first of all, let's find our analytic lights. So let's go to Object, Lights, and then go and search for them here. Now you can see that there are no analytic lights here. There's a small spoiler in here, by the way. And we are just taking the Octane area light and prepare it. So what we want to do is make it a little bit smaller. Also rotate it by 90 degrees and move it to the left and a little bit to the upper position here. So something like that. Next, what we also want to do is get to the samples and make it a lot lower, because what we're going to show with the analytic light is sampling dependent. To find the analytic light, we have to go to the Octane Light tab and then scroll down here to the light type. Now, this is already there because we have default light, light primitives, and then there's the new analytic light. So when we do that, we can see that the light distribution is different. And this is because there's another roll down here where you can set the spread angle and the spread cutout hardness, as well as a fall off. I personally would have preferred if the light type wouldn't jump in the distribution but stays the same. So let's do this here by going and upping the angle, also upping the hardness. So now when we jump from light type to another light type, the distribution stays the same. So what I first want to do is compare the sampling of all of those three light types here. So let's go to the old default light type. Let's make a screenshot in the picture viewer. Let's go to the light primitives and also make a screenshot. And then last but not least, light analytics and also screenshot. Now we have all these samplings with 5 samplings in there. So let's compare, and if you look at the direct lighting here, you can see that our standard lights are very noisy. And already with the light primitives, there is a lot less noise here. And this is going to be even better with the light analytics. Here we go. So you can see the direct lighting is really benefiting from the analytic lights. Okay, let's close that down and play around a little bit with the analytic parameters here. So this is analog to Redshift or Arnold, where we have the spread angle. So let's tilt the light a little bit down here like this. Go back to the parameters and then scroll past to a lower angle. Now, one thing you notice is the lower the angle here, and let's up the samples a little bit more, the more dark the light becomes. And this is not something along the lines that Redshift and Arnold does. In Arnold and Redshift, the light gets brighter, and therefore we have the normalized power here. So if we tick that, we get the same behavior. So basically all the energy the light is distributing is then packed into the small cone, and therefore it seems to become brighter. Because of that, let's also go up here and make it a little bit weaker, for example, a value of 5. That should be good. Now, when we go down here and squeeze it to a very narrow angle, so below 10, let's say, then it really struggles again with sampling. So my advice is to just keep it at 10 and above. Also, there's this fall-off radius, and if we make it really small, because this is a very small scene, you can see what it's doing. So it is altering the fall off of the light so we can make the fall off unnaturally strong. Not sure why we cannot turn it off altogether. I would love an option like that. So its standard is set to 10, which is so far away so it doesn't seem to affect the normal contribution here. But I don't know why there's a setting that you cannot turn off that alters the fall off. We're going to speak about the post volume later, so next we are going to cycle through the different light types that are available for the new analytic lights. To continue with the shapes, let's actually go to our spread angle and increase that again so the light is on par with all the other lights. And then we can go to our Cinema 4D light, click on it, and then search for the area shape here, and then, for example, go to disk. Now, to see it better, let's go outside of our camera here. We now have a perfect circular shape here. If we change back to our old light behavior, you see multiple things. So one is that the light is facing in the other direction, and this is something I have to criticize. So we need to have consistency that the light is always facing in the right direction and not changing by 180 degrees. And the other thing is that we can see that our old light behavior had facets. So this is a plus on the new light primitives, that we don't have facets anymore, but a perfect round shape, as the light is procedural. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, of course you have the spread angle here available, so you can do the same thing with the disk light too. There are also a couple of lights where this is not available, and this is because the lights are volumetric in shape. For example, the spherical light and the cylinder light. And the cylinder light is a new light type. So let's check this out. For a demonstration purpose, let's go with the light primitives first. So let's go there, let's go to Cinema 4D and set it to cylinder. Here we go. And as this is a little bit big, let's make it a little bit smaller, so 5 by 5 by 75 for example. And also maybe a little bit brighter, so let's go and set it to 50. Here we go. So you can see with the old behavior we had segments again, so let me try to get there. So you can see we had segments here, and with the new behavior, as the light is procedural, we have a perfect shape. Now there's an inconsistency again, so if we go to our light type, and set this to analytics, you can see now the cylinder is rotated by 90 degrees, and the gizmo is offset here. So if we of course rotate the gizmo, now our light is facing the same direction as before. But this is something I really don't like, and I wish there was an option to get the same orientation as the gizmo or as the old light behavior. So let me try to show you that the light is perfectly round and has no segments here. So yes, that's true. Also, when we go to our spread angle here, this is doing nothing. The only thing that's doing something is the fall off radius. So if we do that, that was a little bit too small. Let's go with 0.05. You can see that this is still working, as this is not dependent on the shape of the light. As I told you in the beginning, I will tell you the advantages, but also the disadvantages of the new features. So what we are looking at right here is a big area light, a highly reflective rough surface, so this is a metal surface here, and then a cube. Now we haven't set the light type to the new analytic light, we are just sampling the old light type, and you can see that the reflection of the cube is showing up accordingly. Now if I go and set this to analytics, you can see now the reflection sort of moves underneath the cube. And this is some of the disadvantages of the analytic light. So to save on sampling, some of the effects are calculated more like in a game engine, and therefore some effects take place that are not realistic anymore. So when we are going to the metal here and set the roughness down to 0, you can see that now the reflection is respected again. But as soon as we go just a little bit above 0, you can see what's happening here. And unfortunately, this is not a bug, this is a limitation. Again, if you understand the limitations, you can work around them, use the analytic lights only in situations where they produce a near accurate realistic result. At least that's what I'm going to do. Welcome to our next feature. So I wanted to initially show you that in our material ball scene, but for some reason this wasn't working. So I will send this scene to Ahmed to have a look. And while he has a look, we are going to use that in a scene that is working. What am I even talking about? So inside of the analytics light here, you can see there is the use in post volume tick, and it is doing nothing. And the reason why is because we need to go to post effects and enable that. So we go to volume effects, enable that, still nothing. So this is a bit of a quirk here. So you have to have enabled the post effects before the volume effect becomes active. So this is something you need to know. When we have it active, and maybe make the light a little bit stronger or show you another effect. So of course, since we're using light analytics, the spread angle here is of course accepted. So what you can see is a very fast rendering, and the mannequin here is casting shadows in the light beam. And this is a very nice effect. Now of course, nothing is perfect, and I have two disadvantages here. So one is that between the light and the volume seems to be a gap. I don't know where this is coming from. Maybe it's a technical limitation, but hopefully that can be fixed. The other one is a very natural limitation here, and this is because this is a post effect. The post effect, of course, doesn't show up in reflections. So if you are aware of that, you can work with it and within the limitations it has. Welcome to our new scene, which is a landscape object and a daylight system of Octane to light it. So when we go closer here, you can see there's some jagged edges. So this is not a new feature, but a quick tip. If we go to the material and actually check the smooth shadow terminator, you can get rid of those jagged edges without increasing the resolution of the base mesh. Now on to our actual feature, which is the fog that is also found in the Post Effects Volume tab. As we established before, no volume effects before we even turned on our post effects, so let's turn those on. Let's go back to volume effects and let's turn on fog. Now there's nothing happening here, and this is mainly because of the medium radius. We have a really large landscape, so you can see how many millimeters this is. So you can just exchange that into meters. But let's increase the fog radius to 1000. And now you can see, yes, we have fog. And this is the medium's distance around the camera. So if I move my camera, you can see also the fog distance is changing with it. Now let's see what the settings are here. So basically you have a base level. This is the height. So if we increase it, only the mountaintops peek out. And then we have basically also the extinction distance. So this is how far you could look into the fog. Not the density, but like the light scattering through the fog. So if we want to have the density change, you can set the fog half density here. So this is now changing the density. Here we go. Let's dial in something interesting, something like that maybe. So you have like some fog in the valleys. Right now the fog environment contribution is set to 1. That means it takes its color from the environment. If we slide it to 0, it takes its color from the fog color here. So we could make it any color, red for example. And if we slowly slide that towards 1, then it is exchanged with the environment color. So we can also mix it a little bit here. Also, since it's a post effect, of course, it is not showing up in reflections, and there are various limitations because of that. But in general, it is a nice effect, especially if you are dealing with large landscapes and want to deal with fog in them. While we are at the landscape here, let me show you another cool thing. So we actually now for the first time have real distance lights. So if we go to Objects, Lights, and this was the spoiler I talked before, there is the Octane Distant Light. So let me just get this to produce some nice shadows here. Here we go. And also make it a little bit brighter, maybe something like that. And you can see now this is a light where we can have all the settings that a normal light has, but it's coming from a distance. So a untinted sunlight, if you will. Now, when we put in a cube here, you can see that cube is producing a shadow, and the feature for that light here also includes a softer shadow. So if we go here, you can see there is the spread angle. And if we up that number here, you can see we have a distant light with a soft shadow that we can change. And the even more cool feature is that with sunlights, you are limited to one sun, obviously. But with distant lights, you can go and just fill in another one, turn it around into another direction, and therefore have two distant lights. Let's make the intensity a little bit lower. And there you have it. You can now play around and get some really nice effects with those. Also, by the way, those are primitive lights, but you can also set them to analytics. Welcome back to our material ball scene. Let's talk about the post effects. So when we enable that, this is a very strong reaction, and you might be able to spot two new features here. So one new feature is the chromatic aberration that is really strong if you just tick the post-processing, and the other one is the lens flare. So let's tackle one at a time and go with the chromatic aberration first. So let's tile down the lens flare. And the chromatic aberration is an effect that is distorting the image to the rim of the image. So when we turn that down, you can just decide how strong you want it to have. Of course, 1 is a very strong and exaggerated effect. Okay, let's talk about lens flares for a second. So let's get rid of the chromatic aberration and turn up lens flares. So when I move my camera around here, you can see those lens flares are acting really natural. And this is because they are kind of natural. So they take bright spots in the image and then flare off of them, rather than to be a post effect that sticks to the light. So what we could do, for example, to show this is make a metal material, so a very bright material that reflects a lot of light, and then just go and see the reflection. And you can see there's even lens flares off of the reflection right now. One maybe disadvantage here is that right now you're stuck to one lens flare type, so you can't really individualize it. There is a lens flare extent which internally changes the distance from the lenses to each other. This slider is unfortunately broken right now, but it will be fixed soon. In the future, Otoy is planning to get you make lenses and therefore get the respective lens flares, so a lot of possibilities on the horizon. One other disadvantage is the bloom power seems to be connected to the lens flare, so if I lower it down, also the lens flare disappears. So this is a bit sad because I want to access my bloom individually from my lens flares, but in the later section when we talk about output AOVs, or in layman's term, internal Octane compositing, there are options where you can put out the lens flare individually. Welcome to the next chapter, which includes all material changes and features. So let's talk about Diffuse first, because there are some changes in there. Let's go to Material, Create, and create a diffuse material, assign it to the object here, and then also make it active. And let's see in the basic, now the diffuse has a BRDF model. What that means is that you can change different diffuse types and also their roughness. Wait, you say, what has roughness to do with diffuse? Diffuse has always a 100% roughness. Yes, that goes for a 100% smooth surface, but there are different diffuse surfaces that have small bumps or is roughened by the surface structure. So this is what you can simulate here. Let's show you. Let's just stay within the Octane model and go to roughness and up the roughness. And you can see also on the diffuse ball here, as well as on the scene material ball, that the behavior of the diffuse now has changed. Basically, you can think of that like a moon-like surface where you have small grains that cast light in different directions. What you also have is different models, as we talked about here, so we can go to Aberration. Aberration doesn't have a roughness model, so no matter what you set, it's looking the same. And then you have the famous Ornayar, which is used very often in 3D. So there you can have another different roughness model. All of this is fine until you change the material to a material type that includes a reflection, for example glossy. And now the roughness slider is actually used for both the glossiness of the reflection as well as the roughness of the diffuse, which I don't like. I would rather have my separate slider for each. And there's actually a material type that has that. So let's go to materials and then go to the standard surface. Let's apply that. And let's go into the settings here, base layer. And now you can see we have the same diffuse settings here, as well as a roughness slider. So right now it's Ornayar, and if I change the roughness slider, you can see the diffuse changes, but the reflection is staying the same, because the value for that is seated inside of the specular roughness here. Now the disadvantage here is that you cannot change the BRDF for the specular. It's fixed as an energy-preserving GGX and is not changeable. So the only way to get around this would be to create a material layer. Let's do this real quick by creating another diffuse, put the diffuse here, and go to the nodes, then go to the material layer, enable that. So right now we have a diffuse layer. So when we go to material layer, we want to get a specular layer on top to get the reflection here. And now we have a diffuse layer in the base material where we can set the BRDF model or BRDF model and its roughness, and then have a reflection on top where we can do the same. So we can change that to, for example, just GGX instead of energy preserving, and then go to the roughness and set it to our liking. Now, this is not very intuitive, and as I said, I would like to have the normal diffuse materials or any materials that share a diffuse and a reflection to have separate sliders for the roughness of both of them. Next, what we have is a change for all refractive materials. So let's create one real quick by going with a specular material here and assign it. And then when we go to the dispersion tab, you can see the main mode is now the Abbe number. It was the Cauchy before, and if you don't know what they are, you can watch my video for the diamonds about that, upper right corner, if you're interested. This again unifies the method with other renderers, which is more user-friendly to use. Not a material feature, but related. So if you set up your scene with photon tracing as well as with transparent materials that cast photons for the HDRI, as you can see here, sometimes with blurry HDRIs, what you could end up is poor sampling. So now there's an option for cast photons. If you turn them off, the sampling of caustics is handled with path tracing, so the traditional way. Unless, of course, you go into the material under common and turn the caustic generation off completely by using fake shadows. If you're interested in more, upper right corner to the photon tracing video. For the next feature, I turned to touch shading so we can see the node tree a little bit better, because I made a rather complex car paint material. So this feature is turning on and off layers within the stack. So for example, if you don't know what the coding absorption is doing, you can just disable it and see it right away. And this of course is also very good for debugging your materials if you don't know anymore what you did here. So we can turn on and off the flakes real quick and see what the material looking like without them. So this is a very handy feature and I really like it. Another material related one, so this lives inside of the Octane gradient, and we had some interpolation types before, such as constant and linear, this is the default, and then cubic, which is a smoother than linear interpolation, and the new one, which is Hermit, and this is even smoother, but can lead to problems. I think the problem is that the colors are treated as vectors, and opposite on the color spectrum, they are driving into negative range. Somehow I have a problem with negative range vectors in the last couple of weeks, but yeah. So there's a fix for that, so you can see there's a new setting here. So that's the interpolation C-space. So when we set that from physical to perceptual, then we solved our problem and we have a nice smooth transition. To show off the next feature, we need a texture, so let's bring one in here and then pipe it into the bump because we are concerned about the bump. Now, this is one of the biggest changes that will also break older scenes, so you have to be really careful. Now, within the bump, in the bump setting here, there's a new value called bump height. Now, if we change that, you can sort of see what's going on. So when we have smaller values, there are two sets of coordinates that move closer or further away from each other, creating the bump structure. Now, if I was a developer, I wouldn't call that height, but bump delta, because the height can still be manipulated by using the old way, by going with a multiply and then a float texture here. So let's show you. Going with the float texture, we can still make it smaller or way bigger if we go above 1. So if we go above 1 to value of 5, you can see it's really, really strong. While the bump height here actually is just moving it out and in of phase, basically. So myself, I have really small scenes usually. That means we also need a really small delta, so 0.001 for example. And if we go closer, you can still see the delta here. So this is something that's also dependent on the distance of the camera from your object. So maybe we need to even go to 0.2 here, and now it's working for that distance. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And I'm not sure what's the regular setting that keeps intact the old versions of your material. So maybe Octane can chime in and set this so we can have a legacy version of the bump setting so it doesn't break all of our old materials. At least those where we use bump on. Alright, so this is something that's also pretty cool, because sometimes when you're working with very, very small materials, you had problems with bump because you were seeing the two faces shifting out of each other. And with this new setting, you can make it as small as you want, so you don't run into that problem again. So it has a really cool side to it, but breaking old materials is a very bad side that it has. Next, there is a completely new material type. So if we go to materials, create, you can see the null material. Now the null material in itself is a transparent material, so it doesn't show up. But in the material, there is an option for a medium. So if we create a medium here, then we can, for example, go with the scatter medium and then pipe in a float texture in the absorption as well in the scattering. Go to 1 and make this maybe a little bit more dense here. And you can see now we are creating scattered volumes without the need of a other material type that might be increasing the sampling or the overhead in your scene. This material might have other use cases, but I don't know about them yet. Before we jump into our next feature, I have to make a small announcement, and this is that we dropped the output AOVs from this week's video. So the internal Octane's compositing system is a huge thing, and it has so many options that it would need me to record another 2 hours, if not more. So what I decided is to drop that from this video, as I'm already recording 6 hours now, and I still have to edit this, otherwise I won't be able to get the video out this week. Another reason for not showing it in this video is that Cinema 4D right now still uses part of the old system for the AOV outputs. It's usable and it does what it's supposed to do, but some of the features are hidden in the new nodes, that are right now only accessible through the standalone. So maybe until I make this video, they are accessible within Cinema 4D and we can make stuff a little bit more comprehensive. So now on to the last feature in this video. Hopefully I caught all of them despite the output AOVs, of course, and let's see what this is. And last but not least, what you have now is 20 different light passes. So instead of 8, you can stuff in 20 different lights around the scene into different passes to be then composited together inside of the compositor or in your favorite compositing application. This is indeed a great feature that I find very useful because I often ran out of 8 lights and therefore needed to do 2 separate render passes and stuff along those lines. So now with 20, I think this is giving me more than enough to deal with, at least for the couple next years. Oh, and one more thing. We sons of guns made it. We made Otoy listen and changed the default value of the IR to 1.5 for all materials. Yay for that. Thank you for all the developers involved. And as a very last thing, another victory. So in collaboration with Ahmed, basically he did it on his own, I just pushed him to do it. We are now having a DWA compression level slider, and our DWAA and DWAB compressed EXRs are now back to the size they were before if you're using the number of 45, which is also the default. So double yay to that, because now I can have finally more space on my hard drives again. And with that, we are going to the conclusion of our video. A very big thank you for all my supporters over on Patreon. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to make such long videos that take a lot of time out of my day. And therefore, I'm really happy that with their donations, they give me the time to do things like this for myself and for the community. A huge thank you for my 50 euro tier subscriber, Gilles Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. But also for my 15 euro tier subscribers, Abbe Studio, Alexander Stevanovic, Anton, Bavana, BVR, Christian Krajewski, Computer Generated, Eduardo Vicetti, Etienne Schmidt, George Luna, Harish Pavaskar, Jakob Fung, Troy Ciccoline, Just a Frickin', Chris Clemson, Ludger, Lucas Pazon, Marty Kane, Part 1 of 2, Raiko, Render King aka Alessandro Bonchio, Reshock, Scene CGI, Shamus Johnson, Terry Wayne Ranson, Yasin Rupp, and Shibue Chang. And as always, if you're still watching, thank you so very much for sticking with me that long. Let's post a cogwheel emoticon in the comments. At least this is the closest I could find that resembles the Octane logo. Other than that, I say have a great day, have a great week, and happy feature testing. Bye!